Van life is attainable to everybody and potentially free. And you have been lied to, along with everybody else. Let me tell you a story. A couple of years ago, a couple more than a couple, I'd say about 5, my girlfriend bought a 2006 Ford Fiesta. If you don't know what that looks like, look it up. It's a car that is, well, about that big. If you know what a Fiat 500 is, similar size. It was 4-door, but it may as well have been 2-door. No boot, literally so small that when you put down the front seats to lie down, your feet were on the dashboard and your head was in the boot. And we did van life in that vehicle for just over a month at one stage, and for weekends and a couple of days here and there and weeks at a time for maybe 3 years. After that, we got a Ford Focus that was a tiny bit bigger, but not much. And then a Hyundai i30, which admittedly is a big enough car. Excuse me. But it is not a van. It is a car. And we did van life in that up to present day. I now do own a van, a VW vintage T25, like an old boxy 80s camper van. However, it's taken a lot of work to get it on the road and a lot of money. It's not properly usable yet. It's still a project and we're still using the i30. So still to this day, my van life adventures are mostly in a car that's just a daily driven car. Didn't need to put any money into it. Now, when I say free and attainable for everybody, I am assuming that you have a vehicle, because if you don't, then you'll have to get a vehicle. That's not the most expensive thing in the world, but it is a little more than cheap, so I can understand that that's a little more difficult to do. But if you're trying to do van life, I'm assuming that you do have a vehicle, or at least a license, and you can get a vehicle. And my point is, you don't have to buy a big van. You don't even have to buy a van. You can quite literally just get a little tiny car. Let me explain how. Because a lot of people, when I say that, go, how is that even possible? And I'll explain. People have been sold this idea that the activity of being outdoors, van life, hiking, camping, requires this huge price point. Van life, a €20,000 Sprinter, or at bare minimum a €5,000 or €10,000 van. Put €5,000 or €10,000 of camping modifications into it, and then maybe you can consider going and doing van life. It's completely incorrect. My van has ended up being extremely expensive, but that has nothing to do with van life. That's because I have a passion for vintage vehicles. And unfortunately, they're extremely expensive to buy, maintain, run, and fix. But that's a totally different thing. With the car, cheap, easy, done like this. Tiny little car. Everybody imagines, well, you need a cooker and a bathroom and a toilet and a fridge and maybe a microwave and lighting and somewhere to stand up and a bed that's constantly set up. It's not true. For over a month, we did the west coast of Ireland, the Wild Atlantic Way, if you know what that is. I think it is the longest coastal drive in the world. That sounds like a fake fact, and do call me out on it if it's not true, but I've really heard this. I think because even though Ireland is very small, it's a very squiggly road that goes down a very squiggly coastline, and it makes it one of, if not the longest coastal drive, at least in Europe. I think the world? I think. That could be lies. I think. But I'm patriotic, so it's the longest coastal drive in the world, flat. And we did it in the car with 2 sleeping bags, not even a pillow, just ball up the hoodie you were wearing that day and throw it under the neck, and just the front seats as mattresses. The only equipment that we would have had to buy would have been the sleeping bags, but I just had them anyway because I'm an outdoorsy guy, you know. I think she had to buy one in Halfords. It was maybe 16 quid. We did it during the summer, didn't need a great sleeping bag. It is what it is. The food we ate, inexpensive. We would go to Lidl or Aldi. I'm assuming wherever you're watching this from, there is Lidl and Aldi. I think they're global, but on the off chance that's just me being pig-headedly European. Just a very cheap supermarket. And we would get just things like potted noodles, sandwich ingredients that would last a couple of days. Things that didn't have to be refrigerated was the huge thing. So obviously we didn't have a fridge. Just buy things that don't need to be refrigerated. It's that simple. Everybody seems to think you need a fridge. You don't. We didn't miss the fridge at all. Occasionally some of the drinks were a little warm, but it's not the end of the world. And if you want to keep them cold when you're camping at the beach, dig a hole until the water comes through the sand, because the water level will be under the sand, and put the drinks in there. But when the tide comes in, you'll lose your drinks, so watch that. And then we hung t-shirts up over the windows for a little bit of privacy. And we camped at beaches, in forests, just nature reserve, car parks and things. Just be respectful. Don't leave any rubbish. When we left the next day, you'd never even have known we were there. It was an amazing experience. And it cost literally just the price of petrol or gasoline or whatever country you're in. And so by day, we were probably spending maybe a tenner, maybe a tenner on the driving days of petrol. And then for food, every couple of days we'd spend a bit, less than 20 on just some supplies. And we had the adventure of a lifetime. Up and down the west coast of Ireland. Underground waterfalls, cliffs, mountains, lakes, swimming at 6 o'clock in the morning in the ocean. Some of the most beautiful experiences of my life. Some that I'll carry with me forever, and it cost almost nothing. But everybody seems to think that to do that, you need a van, you need a load of expensive equipment. It's just not true. It's just not true. The way that you do it, right now, today, if you're watching this and you have a car, you get some blankets from your house, you get some food from your house, and you drive somewhere. That's it. You pick a nice place. Now, I know that some places you're not allowed to park and all that kind of thing, but mostly, if you're respectful, you clean up after yourself, you don't throw rubbish anywhere, and if you go to the toilet, dig a hole. Don't just leave a little pile of tissues. Somebody told me that some people call them the white flowers, which I think is the funniest way to describe a pile of tissues. People say, oh look, the white flowers. I thought that was hilarious. If you do that, camping is free. The petrol will cost you, the food came from your house, the blankets came from your house, you didn't have to buy anything. You've made a memory that you'll have for the rest of your life, literally. And the same is true for any outdoors activity. When I started hiking, like now, people look at me and go, well, you have a load of equipment. And yeah, I do, because this is my whole life. But when I started, I was just some guy in a pair of cargos from Penny's, Primark. Can't think of the American equivalent of that, just in case you're watching in the US. Probably Walmart. Extremely cheap shop where a pair of pants is about £4. Pair of Nike shoes that had holes in them, and just a hoodie, a backpack that I used for school. That was it. That was all my equipment for probably 2 years before I started buying anything. And those 2 years were probably some of the most enjoyable of the hiking adventures I've ever gone on, because they were new, they were fresh, they were exciting. I was exploring, it was amazing. And I did all of that with no equipment. Even when I stayed overnight, I had a little cheap tent, like a pop-up tent, and I would just take things that I didn't have to cook because I didn't have the cooking equipment yet. I used to just take noodles and a flask of hot water, or literally just sandwiches and rolls and wraps that I made and just took with me. And it was doable and amazing. And at that time, I didn't have a car. I used to cycle, take a train or a bus, cycle to the location and do that, and then do it the way back. I know that's not van life, but it's exploring, it's adventuring for literally no money. I didn't have to buy anything. And I can't vouch for that enough. The idea that you have to go out and buy equipment is ridiculous. You don't. The equipment that you buy is for when you've reached the limitations of your own equipment, clothes, or materials you're using. Like, I only bought hiking boots when the Nike runners I was wearing fell apart. And I went, well, my lifestyle now is full of hiking, so I'll buy some shoes that suit hiking. Do you know? I didn't buy them to go hiking. I started hiking, my shoes fell apart, and I went, well, I'll replace them with something appropriate. And the same was true for everything that I owned. The trip up and down the west coast in the little tiny car, we didn't have any equipment for that. Literally zero. I think it probably took us 10 or 20 adventures to go, I'll probably buy a camping stove. And I think actually my mother, bought me it as a present for mine and my girlfriend's anniversary, was the camping stove that we had. And eventually we went, okay, cool. Now we'll start boiling eggs and making noodles and tea. And that was amazing. That was a huge step up. Not necessary, just beautiful. Now we have equipment. None of that equipment was bought preemptively. It was all, at some point, we outgrew the stuff that we had. It took a long time, and then we went, well, we'll replace it with something that we need. The same is true for clothes. The same is true for equipment. The same is true for vehicles. You do not need a van to go on adventures. Van life isn't about the van. It's about the freedom and the beauty and exploring and seeing the world around you. It's not about owning a cool vehicle. It's a cool part of it. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you can afford it, please do. But that's not what it's about. I don't know how many times I've had people turn around to me and go, yeah, but how do you afford to do all of these things? I don't understand. And I go, well, because it doesn't cost me anything. It costs me nothing. And it doesn't have to cost you anything either. If right now, this second, you go, I want to go on an adventure. I don't care if you live in a city, a town, nature, agricultural farming land. I don't care where you live, unless you live on a boat in the middle of the ocean, and that's a really cool adventure in and of itself, so I don't know why you're watching this. You can go on an adventure with what you have right now. If you have a pair of shoes and working legs, honestly, this is going to be probably wind up a lot of people, but even if you don't have working legs, I bet you could work it out, even if you were moderately physically disabled. I'm not, and that could be a very flippant thing to say, but I'm saying that because I've seen people online. I don't know them personally, I don't know how real what they're doing is, but I've seen people online that have managed to go on really beautiful adventures that are completely physically disabled. So I think that most people set their limitations a lot closer to them than they really are. If you push those boundaries, you'd probably get a lot further. But right now, you could get a backpack, a sleeping bag, food from your house, and just go somewhere. Just go somewhere. It's more than 90% of the world will ever do. It's a beautiful experience. It's a beautiful adventure. It might change your life. You might realise that you do want to live a life where eventually you have to replace your jacket with a nice jacket, and you have to replace your backpack with a waterproof one, and you have to replace your shoes with something you can hike in. It'd be an amazing adventure, or maybe it's just an experience that you have once and you have that for the rest of your life and you talk about it at parties. But either way, it doesn't have to cost you money. You don't have to buy a big van. You don't have to buy anything expensive. Anything. Literally anything. You can start right now with what you have.